Maybe we'll go surfing. It's a great idea. Welcome back to my channel. Let's get into it. Today I'm going to show you how to fix a ding on your surfboard. Fiberglass surfboard with polyester foam. If you have an epoxy board, there's slightly different steps you need to follow because polyester resin will eat up the foam inside your board. So this is a polyester foam surfboard. I'll show you this ding right here. A little tail ding we got. And you just kind of scan, see if you can find any dings on the rails. Here's a nice one. You can stick your fingernail in it. It should probably be fixed. Might be it. We'll flip it over and take a look at the bottom. And here's that same ding we saw before. And the tail ding. So the bottom looks good. All right, so first step is you're going to want to cut out the dings. So I like to use, if I can find it, a blade. Make sure you have a clean blade on there. If it's not sharp, makes it a little more difficult. Now where are my blades? These are great. And pop one out. Get a nice fresh blade. Push it up. Push the yellow button. Make sure it's in. I don't like to cut with it fully out unless it's a big ding. I like to kind of slide it in a little bit like that. And I don't know how I'm going to do this with one hand. So anywhere that it's cracked, you're going to want to cut it out. And I like to go from both ends, both sides of the ding. Cut that out. And you're going to start. If you don't have a sharp blade, it makes it a little harder. You're just cutting out where you have the cloth separated. You want to make it as clean as possible. And just cut it out. Don't be afraid to cut out too much. You can always fill it in. Put your knife away. And then coming over to this little tail ding. Anywhere the glass is broken, you want to cut that off. Like I said, don't be afraid to cut into the board too much. Next step, you're going to want to make some putty. Putty I like to use is mix up some Q-cell balloons, which is basically like a very, very super light powder, and it makes great ding repair putty. And you're going to mix it with, we use the Sun Cure polyester resin. And remember, if you're working on an epoxy board, do not use polyester resin. You will ruin the foam in your board. It's fixable, but you don't want to do that. All right, so it's kind of like loopy, right? Doing this with one hand is not easy. But a little, depending on what type of ding you're working on, you want it like peanut buttery. If it's a big ding where you're filling in more, and it's not going to drip out, like on the deck of a board or on the bottom of a board, then you're going to want it maybe a little more runny. This way it'll really fill in nicer. But if you are just doing a side ding on a rail where it's going to be kind of goopy, you don't really want it to be very goopy where the goop will fall out. So I'm actually, yeah, we're gonna flip this over actually, because you want it as upright as possible. And this way, ooh, I didn't see that. That we can just sand down. The glass is not broken, so that can just be sanded. That can just be sanded and patched, but we're not going to bother with cutting it out because the glass itself is not broken. You just kind of like the resin coat is just cracked. So that's good. We're going to fill that in. Trick of the trade, if you want to stand your board sideways like this instead of flat for a rail ding, that'll help hold it in. But I'm going to show you a trick with some masking tape. Like a taller table. If you're gonna get drips, you can use masking tape, and you want to get it ready. So it's just gonna basically hold it in like that, so it doesn't drip. Does that make sense? You're just gonna like hold it in, fill it in, and hold it with the tape. But we're not putting that on yet. Leave that there. I'm trying to block the sun because the sun's getting a little low, and this sun cure resin cures in the sun. So you want to make sure that when you're using the sun cure resin, that you're doing your work inside, not in direct sunlight. And then so this is what it looks like. And so what we're gonna do is we're just gonna flip it in there. Boop, boop, boop. It's like awkward because I'm not normally standing on this side, but that's okay. Fill it in, push it. You really want to like push it into the hole that you made. Put the cap back on so there's no residual light getting in there. And this is what it looks like. It's not, see how it's not really dripping too much, so we don't need the tape, but it's pretty solid on there. So what we're gonna do is after we finish gooping, we're going to, this is nice, I can do this with one hand. These cans are great. We actually get these from the dump in the recycling center. And, oops, wrong, show you that. Obviously my videoing and ding repair needs some assistance. Okay, and now we pick up the board and we bring it inside. Here we go, here we go. Whoa, jeez. I don't normally do this one-handed, but find a nice sunny spot. Put your board down on a nice rack. And let it cure in the sun. We got our 2 dings curing, and just let it sit. Once these are cured, once they get hard, you can already feel it's hard on the top where the sun is beating down on it. So you let that cure, and then once it's cured on the one side, super bright sun today, so it's curing pretty fast. And you flip it over, and I'll probably let this sit for about 5-10 minutes, depending on how sunny it is. Yeah, so that's that. what else can I show you while we're in here? So next up is going to be, I'll just do it while the board's out there. You're going to want to cut out some pieces of cloth. Cut out pieces of cloth to match the size of the ding. So you're going to want to go out, so say the ding is about that big. You're going to want to go out an inch or two depending on the size of cloth. So if that makes sense. So say the tail ding is about that big, right? So what we're going to want to do for the tail ding is we want to cut a circle that's going to cover that whole corner of that tail. And I'll show you how to put it on. It's basically like, say this is the tail, right? It's going to wrap around the tail like that. But I'll show you on the board what that looks like. And then the other ding was kind of a longer ding, so you're gonna, if you're working with some cloth, kind of fine. I like to cut my pieces diagonally because the cloth, you can see it stretches only diagonally. If you were to pull it with the grain, it doesn't stretch, right? But if you go diagonally, it does. So I like to cut my pieces diagonally for the length of the ding. So I don't remember, it was maybe this long, and it had that little divot in it. So we're gonna go something like, make sure we account for the divot. Something like that. It should cover it completely. This is probably a little big for that ding in particular, but it's okay. Better bigger than too small to cover the board. So now we're gonna go and we're gonna sand. We're gonna go and sand the board. So I like to sand in the shade. So I'm gonna pick up my board and I'm going to put it into the shade. And okay, so I did another video about de-waxing your board, because look at this. I am gonna de-wax this board. I just wanted to do the ding repair first to make this video, but like the wax just comes off and it's like gets all over the racks. And then when you're working on a nice clean board and there's wax on your rack, that is not fun. And then you gotta clean it. So I don't like to work on boards that have a lot of wax, so I will clean this off. I just wanted to make this video while I had the time. So I'm going to show you how to sand the dings. So like I said, we have, like you've seen before, we've got nice, hard, you can't dig into it, it's not squishy anymore, it's cured pretty good, and the tail nice and hard as a rock. That's what we want. So when it's hard, then you're going to get your sander. For the initial sanding of, oh geez, I'm just making a mess, aren't I? For the initial sanding, I like to use 60 grit. What's on here now, this is an old 220. I was finishing a board before, so I really like these. This sander in particular, it's got, you can adjust the speed on here, which is really nice. I like to have it on about 3 or 4, depending on what I'm sanding. For the finer stuff, I like it slower. And then what I like to do is dust it off first. See how dusty that is? This is all just accumulated from sanding before. And what I like to do is, we have an air compressor and I'm just gonna shoot it all over this, get the dust out. So just bear with me, it's gonna be loud. So nice to clean your equipment. I'm gonna go get the 60 grit we're gonna start with. So we got some 60 grit, pretty rough, good first grit to start with, and you just line up holes on here like that. Sticks, Velcro, beautiful. and we're gonna get sanding. All right, I'm gonna take my microphone off because I don't want sand in my microphone. Before I start sanding, I just want to show you, sometimes on the tops of the boards, you've got, if you haven't de-waxed it, around where you're going to be sanding, because the sanding pad is so big, it's going to like cover a big area. You want to scrape off any wax that's in the surrounding area. You don't want to gum up your sander, do you? No gumming up the sander. I was just adding a little bit more Q-Cell because there was a little bubble in here that didn't get filled in, so I just added a little more Q-Cell. That'll cure in a few minutes. This one came out pretty good. And then we're just going to take some sandpaper and just round it out. Make sure when you're sanding you get up around the ding, because you're going to want the resin to stick to the board, and you have to make sure you sand it really well. So now we're going to bring the board back inside. Now we're going to take our pieces of cloth that we cut out and we're going to put them on the board. You just mold it around. Can you see that? I just kind of like mold it on there, and don't worry if it's not tight. We are going to use the paintbrush and the resin to tighten it up on there, and then we're going to take over to our, look how nice and clean that is. And we're going to place it. It's really big for that, but that's all right. We're going to place it over the ding like that, just around the rail, just like that. It's very large. I might cut that down, but for now it'll work. I'm going to paint on the resin. So the resin we use is that same Suncure polyester resin. The paintbrush, and it looks a little green. That's okay. And you want to make sure you mix it, because you can't see it right now, but the wax will, the sanding wax will come up to the top of the liquid, and you want to make sure that that gets mixed in to your resin. All right, so move your cloth to the side, and you're just gonna mix it up. Get it so it's nice thin, you don't want it like slobbered. And you're just gonna paint the resin around the ding. About the size of your piece of cloth. And remember that, I'll show you when we put it on the top, but this ding had a little bit of cracks on the bottom side, and I'm going to make sure that the cloth is covering those cracks also. So we're just going to place it on, it'll stick because the resin's a little sticky, and then same thing, I'm just going to like pat to paint it. Just get it soaked, get all of the cloth soaked, and that's about it. If it's a big ding on both sides of the board, top and bottom, you're going to want to maybe flip the board over, but that's basically it. Cover up the ding with the cloth, soak it with resin, and you're good to go. So same thing with the tail ding. You're going to want to get some resin on the brush, dab it on there so it's nice and pretty thick. And then you're going to take your already shaped corner piece and just place it on there. Take the resin and dab it. And you sometimes you got to work with it. You don't want the resin too thick because then you'll get bubbles and the resin won't be sort of attached to the board itself. But nice clean strokes and good to go, looks like. So it's really clothed on there. And it's okay if you leave some resin, leave some cloth that isn't soaked with resin, that's totally fine. Because you're just going to be sanding off the edges of the cloth anyway. So that's totally fine if you're just going to leave it. So now we're going to bring the board back out into the sun. Then you're going to let that cure nice. There it is. Curing. And then we wait again. A lot of waiting. So what I'll do is I'll be working on like anywhere from 1 to 5, 6 boards at a time. Just because we don't have that many racks that you can comfortably place them on and work on them all at the same time. So what I'm going to do now is cure it on this side. You would give it the scratch test. If it feels rubbery, it's not ready yet. See how it leaves kind of like a mark too? If it's rubbery, it's not done yet. So you're going to want to let it sit for another minute. But if it's still got a cure on the other side and it's a little rubbery, that's all right. You just flip it over and it will continue to cure. Even though it's not directly in the sun, it's getting a lot of reflection from the sun, and then you just wait for your top layer to cure. When I'm sanding out the patches, I like to start, if there's rail dings, I like to start on the top. So on the deck, I'll start with the deck facing up. So when I first place it out in the sun, I put it so the deck is up, right? And then so the second round of curing will be on the tail, so that when I flip it again, if the tail isn't quite cured yet, you can get it a little early, flip it back over, it'll continue to cure while you're sanding the top, right? The deck. So that's sort of like my order of things. I'm very into efficiency and having a smooth transition as far as the different steps, because there's a lot of steps, and if you're fumbling around waiting for things, it can take a while. So yeah, that should be cured. We'll give it the scratch test. Good, not rubbery anymore. Now we move it to the sanding area. And like I said, I like to do deck first. Perfect. So we're gonna start with the deck first. And I'm just gonna leave the camera here. I will sand it and you can watch me from there. Let me get my mask. For sanding the patches, I'm using the same 60 grit that I used for sanding out the Q-cell. So if you have a super delicately glassed board, you can use like 80 or even 150 to sand out the patches. This board isn't particularly thin, or like sometimes a lot of older boards can have like a super thin layer of resin over the glass because it's just like deteriorated over time. That you're gonna want to use a finer grit. But for this one, it's like totally solid board. We're gonna go with the 60 grit. So I'm gonna sand that out now, sand out the patches, and I will show you what that looks like. The other thing I want to mention is like, you don't want to sand through the cloth that you just put on here. So I don't fully sand and make it perfect with the machine because, especially using 60 grit, it can go through your cloth pretty easily if you don't finesse it as gracefully as you need to. So I'm gonna go over this and I'm gonna hand sand the remainder of it. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you do want to get so that there's no smooth parts, right? Because you want the whole thing sanded so that all of the surface is sanded and the resin will stick to it. So I'm gonna go ahead and hand sand it now. Nice and sanded, nice and smooth. I kind of got all the areas, or even around here, you're going to want to gloss with the resin all around. And this is nice there. Same resin we used, polyester resin we used for putting the cloth on. We're just going to do a nice thin coat of gloss just to cover the cloth that we just sanded. And then once that's glossed, we're going to put it back out in the sun. Sometimes you have to flip your board over to get both sides, but if they're little just rail or nose tail dings. The next step is going to be, once this is cured, we are going to polish it out with some 220 grit. Nice and suave. Suave. It's like so smooth. So this is the fun part. You really get to get it nice and smooth. A lot of waiting around in ding repair. Unless you strategize and work on boards in sort of a strategic order. I don't normally just work on one board at a time, so I'm not normally just like standing around talking. down. They're nice and smooth. It's okay if you go into the glass a little. That's totally fine because it's just basically an extra coat over the glass that's already on your board, except for where the actual ding is. So where the actual ding is, try not to sand into the glass, but definitely try not to sand through the glass. If you sand through the glass, then there's no glass, because you basically just cut out the ding, you cut out the glass, and then if there's no glass on top of that, there's no glass. Don't sand through the glass. So I'm not showing you details of how exactly I'm sanding, but you get the idea, I hope. Kind of want to just like feel the board. You want to feel the board. You can really see where you're sanding. But basically that's it. So feel free to drop any questions you have. Sorry, there's a lot of dust on my camera. Feel free to drop me any questions about ding repair in general, especially in regard to right now this particular board was polyester foam. So I will do another video on epoxy boards where there's some like extra steps involved and you have to use different materials. So you still use the same cloth, you just use a different resin, and it needs to be epoxy. Because if you do not use epoxy resin on an epoxy board, it will literally eat the epoxy foam inside your board. So we call them pain in the butt boards because sometimes they like to hold water inside them, and if the water hasn't drained and you're trying to repair it, a ding, you can put, you know, resin on it, you can fill it with whatever epoxy, you can glass over it sometimes, and they will still leak. Pain in the butt. Anyway, that's for another video. I hope you enjoyed the video today, and if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. Have a wonderful day. Talk to you soon. Bye.